When a woke journalist publishes lies about his military service, a veteran, the day started like any other for Jack Calloway. The early morning sun poured through the window of his modest farmhouse, painting golden streaks across the well-worn wooden floors. Outside, the rhythmic clucking of chickens and the faint hum of the town waking up created a serene backdrop. Jack sipped his coffee, savoring the silence. For the retired veteran, mornings were a sacred time, a quiet reminder of the simplicity he had earned after decades of service. But this morning, his peace was shattered. The knock at the door came sharply, cutting through the stillness. Jack, accustomed to the occasional delivery or neighborly visit, opened it without hesitation. A small, unmarked package lay on the porch, the handwriting on the label unfamiliar. He scanned the surroundings, but the dusty road leading to his home was empty. Shrugging, he brought the package inside, his curiosity piqued. At the kitchen table, he unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a stack of papers, newspaper clippings, screenshots, and printed articles. His brow furrowed as he read the headline of the topmost piece: "The Myth of a Military Hero, Jack Calloway's Deception Exposed." For a moment, Jack stared at the words, disbelief tightening his chest. He flipped through the pages, his hands trembling. The article, written by a journalist named Lucas Byrne, accused Jack of fabricating his military career. It claimed his accolades were undeserved and that his storied reputation as a war hero was built on lies. Jack's world unraveled with every sentence he read. The article detailed supposed discrepancies in his service records, questioning his rank, medals, and even his deployments. Byrne had dug deep, citing anonymous sources and a disgraced former soldier, Carl Mason, to bolster his claims. The coffee in Jack's cup had gone cold, but he barely noticed. His mind raced, recalling the years he'd spent in service. Years of sacrifice, loyalty, and quiet pride. He had carried out missions he couldn't discuss, lost brothers he would never forget, and endured wounds that left scars far beyond the physical. And now, his honor, the one thing he thought unassailable, was under siege. Emma, his 17-year-old granddaughter, burst through the door, her school bag slung over one shoulder. "Grandpa, did you see this?" she asked breathlessly, waving her phone. Jack looked up, his steely gaze meeting hers. "See what?" he asked, though he already knew. She placed the phone on the table and opened a video. It was a televised segment discussing the article. Pundits debated Jack's character, with some condemning him outright, while others called for patience. The caption beneath the video read, "Military hero or fraud? The nation reacts to shocking expose." Emma's voice quivered. "They're saying horrible things about you, Grandpa. Kids at school are." She stopped, her eyes glistening with tears. Jack reached out, his calloused hand covering hers. "It's all right, Emma," he said, though his voice betrayed none of the turmoil inside him. But it wasn't all right. The fallout was swift and merciless. Jack's phone rang incessantly. Reporters, former colleagues, and even old friends wanting answers. His mailbox overflowed with letters, many of them hateful, calling him a fraud and a disgrace. His once supportive community turned cold. The local diner where he'd been a regular for years suddenly seemed unwelcoming. Whispers and side glances replaced warm greetings. The veterans group he'd helped establish distanced itself, issuing a statement that they were reviewing the allegations. Jack's decades of service, his sacrifices, and the lives he'd saved now felt like distant, meaningless echoes. In his quiet moments, Jack clung to one memory, a covert mission decades ago that defined his career. It was a mission so secretive that even now, the details were buried under layers of classified documents. He had sworn an oath of silence, and that oath had cost him dearly. It was the only explanation for the gaps in his service record that Lucas Byrne had exploited. But how could he explain that to the world? Emma refused to let her grandfather retreat into himself. She spent hours scouring the internet, reading every word of Byrne's article and the subsequent comments. She was appalled by how quickly strangers judged a man they didn't know. Determined to fight back, she confronted Jack one evening. "We can't just sit here and let them do this to you," she said, her voice firm. There has to be a way to prove they're wrong. Jack sighed, his weary eyes meeting hers. Some battles aren't worth fighting, Emma. But this one is, she insisted. You taught me to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Her words struck a chord, but Jack remained silent. Deep down, he knew the truth could destroy more than just his reputation. It could reopen wounds better left untouched. Lucas Byrne, meanwhile, basked in the limelight. His article had gone viral, earning him accolades from his peers and interviews on major networks. For Lucas, it wasn't just about exposing Jack. It was personal. His father, a disgraced former captain, had always blamed the military for ruining his life. Lucas grew up resenting men like Jack, who symbolized everything his father could never be. But Lucas wasn't prepared for the pushback. Online forums buzzed with debates about the article's credibility. Anonymous accounts questioned the reliability of his sources, particularly Carl Mason, whose own military record was riddled with misconduct. Lucas dismissed the criticism as the desperate clamor of Jack's supporters. But late one night, as he scrolled through the comments, an email landed in his inbox. It was from an anonymous sender. The subject line read, "You've gone too far. Jack, too." Received an anonymous message. Unlike Lucas's, this one wasn't a warning. It was a threat. A single sheet of paper appeared in his mailbox, bearing the words, "Stay silent, or we'll make sure you regret it." Beneath the message was a photograph. Jack with his platoon, taken during the classified mission. The sight of the photo sent a chill down his spine. The men in the picture weren't just comrades, they were family. Most of them had died during the mission, their sacrifices buried alongside the truth. Seeing their faces again was both a comfort and a torment. Jack burned the message and the accompanying photograph, but the damage was done. The memories he had spent years suppressing came flooding back, each one more painful than the last. In the days that followed, Jack withdrew further. Emma, frustrated by his silence, took matters into her own hands. She wrote an open letter defending her grandfather, sharing stories of his kindness, bravery, and humility. The letter gained traction online, but it also attracted more scrutiny. Critics accused Emma of being naive, of blindly supporting a man whose lies had finally caught up with him. Late one night, Jack stood on the porch, staring at the stars. He thought of his fallen comrades, of the promises they had made to one another. He had kept his promise, even when it cost him everything. But now, he wondered if that promise had been worth the price. As dawn broke, Jack made a decision. He wouldn't break his oath. Not yet, but he also wouldn't allow his granddaughter to fight this battle alone. He owed her that much. Jack placed a call to an old friend, a fellow veteran with ties to the intelligence community. His voice, though steady, carries a weight of resolve. "I need your help," he says. "It's time we set the record straight." Lucas Byrne thrived on controversy. For years, the young journalist had built his reputation by skewering authority figures, exposing their weaknesses, and tearing apart their carefully constructed facades. His byline had become synonymous with outrage, and his work was praised as brave and unflinching. Yet beneath the veneer of principled journalism lay a man driven more by personal vendettas than by truth. Lucas sat in his cramped apartment, surrounded by stacks of old newspapers and half-empty coffee mugs. On his laptop screen was a photo of Jack Calloway, a stoic man in his military uniform, featured in a veteran's registry for his community service. Jack's calm demeanor and decorated past sparked something deep within Lucas, a simmering resentment rooted in his own fractured childhood. Lucas's father, Robert Byrne, had once been a captain in the Army, but his career had ended in disgrace, the details shrouded in scandal and whispers of corruption. Robert's bitterness had poisoned Lucas's upbringing, filling their home with vitriol against the military. False heroes, Robert would sneer at men like Jack, men who represented everything he had failed to be. Now, Lucas saw an opportunity to expose another so-called hero. Jack's name carried weight in his small town, but Lucas was convinced it hid something darker. He leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smirk on his face as he began to dig into Jack's records. The deeper Lucas delved, the more he convinced himself that he was onto something. Through public records and old interviews, he pieced together a timeline of Jack's military service. It was impressive on the surface, but Lucas zeroed in on a small gap in Jack's service history, a year with no documented deployments or assignments. Lucas's fingers flew over the keyboard as he crafted an email to Carl Mason, a disgraced former soldier who had served with Jack. Mason's name had surfaced in forums where disillusioned veterans vented their frustrations. Lucas framed his message carefully, appealing to Mason's bitterness and promising him a platform to share his side of the story. When Mason responded, his account was predictably damning. He accused Jack of inflating his achievements and taking credit for missions he hadn't led. Lucas knew Mason's credibility was shaky, but that didn't matter. All he needed was a kernel of doubt to weave a compelling narrative. Lucas's editor, Rachel Porter, was no stranger to his tactics. As the head of a scrappy online publication struggling to stay afloat, Rachel valued Lucas's ability to draw clicks. But she also knew his methods were often reckless. "Are you sure about this, Lucas?" Rachel asked during their meeting. "Jack Calloway's not just some CEO or politician. He's a veteran. If you're wrong, this could blow up in our faces." Lucas waved her concerns away. "It's all in the article, Rachel. The records don't lie, and I've got a source backing it up." Rachel sighed, her fingers drumming against her desk. "Fine, but if this goes south, you're taking the heat." Within hours of its publication, the article went viral. Social media exploded with debates about Jack's character. Some hailed Lucas as a brave truth-teller, while others condemned him for attacking a veteran. The small town of Green Ridge, where Jack lived, became a focal point of national attention. The impact on Jack was immediate and brutal. His home, once a haven of peace, became a target. Vandals spray-painted the word fraud across his front fence. His phone rang incessantly with calls from reporters and angry strangers. Even his trips to the grocery store were met with cold stares and whispered accusations. Emma, heartbroken by the onslaught, refused to let her grandfather face it alone. One night, after reading yet another hateful comment online, she sat down and poured her heart into an email addressed to Lucas Byrne. "Mr. Byrne," she wrote, "I don't know why you've decided to attack my grandfather, but you're wrong about him. He's the kindest, bravest person I know. Please, I'm begging you, take back what you said. You don't understand what you've done to our family." Lucas read the email with a detached amusement. He dismissed Emma's plea as naive, filing it away without a second thought. To him, the backlash against Jack was just a sign that his work was making an impact. Emboldened by the article's success, Lucas began drafting a follow-up piece. He planned to delve deeper into Jack's alleged fraud, using more of Mason's claims to solidify his narrative. The buzz around the story was too good to let go, and Lucas was determined to ride the wave of attention as far as it would take him. But late one night, as Lucas typed furiously at his desk, his email inbox pinged. The subject line of the new message caught his eye. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Lucas frowned, opening the email. It contained no text, only a single attachment, a photograph of Jack Calloway surrounded by his platoon. Lucas recognized the image from his research, but something about it felt off. The photo was old, yet it had been edited to highlight Jack's face and scrawl an ominous note across the bottom. Some stories are better left untold. For the first time, Lucas felt a pang of unease. He scanned the email for a sender address, but it was encrypted and untraceable. The message left him with more questions than answers. Lucas told himself it was just a scare tactic, likely from one of Jack's supporters. But as he returned to his writing, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled into something far bigger than he had anticipated. Meanwhile, Jack sat alone in his living room, staring at a similar photograph he had received in the mail. Unlike Lucas, Jack knew exactly who was behind the warning. His hands trembled as he held the picture, memories of a long-buried mission flooding back. Jack Calloway stood in his kitchen, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound as he stared at the email Emma had printed out and placed on the counter. It was a scathing attack, Lucas Byrne's words dripping with venom as he questioned Jack's honor, his service, and his very identity. Emma's voice broke the silence, trembling with frustration. "Grandpa, you have to fight this. You can't let people believe these lies. she pleaded, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. Jack shook his head, his jaw tight. "Emma, there are things I swore I'd never talk about. Not to you, not to anyone. Some truths come with a cost, and I won't risk the lives it could still affect. But look at what he's doing to you." Emma pressed, her eyes filled with tears. "He's ruining everything you've built. We need to fight back, or no one will ever know the truth." After a long pause, Jack sighed, his shoulders slumping. "We'll look into it," he said quietly, his voice heavy with resignation. "But I'm warning you, this won't end the way you think it will." That night, as Jack stared out the window of his modest home, his mind drifted back to the years he'd tried so hard to forget. The faces of his platoon filled his memory, a group of young soldiers bound together by duty and sacrifice. There was Pete, the joker of the group, Sam, the steady hand who never flinched under pressure, and Carl Mason, a cocky recruit with a chip on his shoulder. The mission that changed everything had started like any other. Jack had led his men into hostile territory, tasked with extracting a high-value target. But something had gone wrong, terribly wrong. In the chaos, Carl had made a critical mistake, one that cost lives and jeopardized the mission. Jack had been forced to make a decision that haunted him to this day, a choice that had turned Carl against him forever. Unaware of the full weight of Jack's past, Emma threw herself into her own investigation. Her first stop was the internet, where she scoured forums and social media threads discussing Lucas Burns' article. Amid the vitriol, she noticed a recurring theme: doubt about Lucas's credibility. On a veterans forum, one user questioned Lucas's reliance on Carl Mason, calling him a liar with an agenda. Another claimed Carl had been dishonorably discharged for misconduct, while others hinted at his involvement with fringe groups critical of military leadership. Emma's curiosity deepened as she pieced together the puzzle. If Carl was Lucas's primary source, and if he had a personal vendetta against Jack, then Lucas's article might not just be misleading. It could be entirely fabricated. Emma confronted Jack with her findings, but he remained hesitant. Carl's always had a grudge, he admitted, his voice laced with regret. "But that doesn't mean I can talk about what happened. It's classified, Emma. And even if it wasn't, I wouldn't drag my men's names through the mud to clear mine." Emma wasn't satisfied with his answer. "But Grandpa, what if he's lying about everything? Don't you want people to know the truth?" Jack met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "The truth has a way of coming out when it's ready. Until then, we focus on what we can prove." Meanwhile, Lucas was busy drafting his next article. Carl had provided more details, specific anecdotes meant to paint Jack as a fraud and an opportunist. Lucas didn't bother verifying the claims. To him, the story was already too good to let facts get in the way. The follow-up article hit like a bombshell, reigniting the controversy and pushing Jack further into the spotlight. News outlets picked up the story, debating the morality of Lucas's expose. Jack's community, once proud of their local hero, now treated him with suspicion and disdain. Fueled by frustration, Jack decided to confront Carl directly. He found him at a dingy local bar, nursing a drink and laughing with a group of rough-looking men. The room fell silent as Jack approached, his presence commanding attention despite the casual setting. "Carl," Jack said, his voice calm but firm. "We need to talk." Carl turned, a sly grin spreading across his face. Well, if it isn't the man of the hour. Come to confess, Jack." Jack ignored the taunt. "You know the truth about what happened, and you know Lucas is twisting it. Why are you doing this?" Carl leaned back in his chair, feigning nonchalance. "Because it's about time someone knocked you off that pedestal. You think you're better than everyone else, don't you, Mr. Perfect Soldier?" Jack clenched his fists, but he kept his composure. "This isn't about me, Carl. It's about the men we served with, the ones who didn't make it back. You're dishonoring their memory." Carl's smirk faltered for a moment before he leaned in close. "You think this is just me? There are bigger forces at play here, Jack. You've made enemies you don't even know about." Emma's research took a darker turn as she dug into Carl's past. She confirmed that he had been dishonorably discharged for insubordination and theft. Further investigation revealed his ties to groups that spread anti-military propaganda and targeted decorated veterans. Her findings gave her a glimmer of hope. If she could expose Carl's agenda, she might discredit Lucas's article. But her progress stalled when she came across a heavily redacted document linked to Jack's service. It hinted at a classified mission, but the blacked-out sections left more questions than answers. Frustrated but undeterred, Emma printed the document and brought it to Jack. "Look at this," she said, placing it on the table in front of him. "Whatever this mission was, it's connected to everything that's happening now. We need to figure out what they're hiding." Jack stared at the document, his face pale. "Emma, this isn't something you can just dig into. There are people who would do anything to keep this buried." Lucas Burns sat at his cluttered desk, the hum of his computer screen casting shadows across his face. His instincts told him there was more to Jack Calloway than a few inconsistencies in a service record. The words "classified mission" in the redacted file Emma had uncovered had sparked his interest, and now he was chasing a lead that could elevate his career even further. In his research, he stumbled across cryptic mentions of a retired military figure, General Edward Harlow, whose name seemed to be tied to Jack's past. "Harlow," Lucas muttered to himself. "What were you hiding, Jack?" His determination was no longer just about exposing Jack. It was about uncovering a bigger story, one that could cement his reputation as the journalist who held the establishment accountable. Meanwhile, Jack's unease deepened as a series of threatening letters began arriving at his home. The first was tucked inside his mailbox, a single sheet of paper with scrawled handwriting. "Keep your mouth shut, Calloway. You know what's at stake." Emma found the second letter while fetching the morning paper. Its tone was sharper, more explicit. "We know where you live. If you value your family, stay quiet." Jack crumpled the note in his hand, but the message was clear. Someone wanted him silenced. Jack's mind reeled as he thought back to the mission that had changed everything. It was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance, but as his team ventured deeper into enemy territory, they encountered a setup, a deadly ambush that had left many of his men dead. The betrayal wasn't immediate, but the signs had been there. Orders that didn't add up, backup that never arrived. The flashback seared through his mind. His platoon trapped, under fire, radioing for help that never came. Jack's voice had cracked with desperation as he pleaded with command, only to be met with static. Later, he'd learned that the betrayal came from within, orchestrated by someone high up. He'd buried the truth to protect those who survived and honor the dead. But now, it seemed the past was clawing its way back to the surface. Emma's digging took a surprising turn when she unearthed a connection between Lucas's father, Captain Richard Byrne, and Jack's mission. The military tribunal records she found were fragmentary but damning. Captain Byrne had been court-martialed for insubordination and dereliction of duty. "Grandpa, look at this," Emma said, spreading the documents on the dining table. Lucas's dad was there. "He was part of your mission." Jack's face darkened as he scanned the records. "Richard Byrne," he said quietly. "I remember him. He wasn't a bad man, but he got caught up in something bigger than himself. They needed a scapegoat, and he was it. Is that why Lucas is doing this? To clear his father's name?" Emma asked. Jack shook his head. "Lucas doesn't know the full story. He's chasing shadows, and he's too blinded by his own ambition to see the truth. Lucas's relentless pursuit of the story led him to a name that sent chills down his spine: General Edward Harlow. The retired general had long been rumored to have covered up war crimes during his tenure, and Jack's classified mission appeared to be tied to one of those scandals. Lucas began piecing together a narrative in which Jack was complicit, an accomplice to the general's crimes. At the same time, Emma found evidence suggesting Harlow had orchestrated the ambush Jack's platoon suffered. Declassified snippets hinted at a covert operation gone wrong, one that Harlow had manipulated to eliminate witnesses to his own wrongdoing. Lucas's editor, Sylvia Chong, began to grow uneasy. Her inbox was flooded with complaints and legal threats, not just from Jack supporters but from critics of Lucas's methods. She started to dig into Lucas's past articles and found troubling inconsistencies. One source recanted their statements. Another claimed Lucas had fabricated quotes. "Lucas," Sylvia said, calling him in her office, "I'm starting to question the validity of your claims about Calloway. There are too many gaps in your story, and this could backfire." Lucas scoffed. "Sylvia, this is the story of the year. I'm uncovering a military conspiracy. For God's sake. Don't you see the bigger picture? But Sylvia's tone remained firm. I see a journalist who's walking a dangerous line. If you don't have irrefutable proof, we're pulling the plug. Jack's lawyer, an old family friend named Michael, urged him to file a defamation suit against Lucas. Jack, you have grounds for a case, Michael said, spreading legal briefs across the table. Lucas's claims are baseless, and we can prove it. Let the court see the truth. But Jack shook his head. I can't risk it, Mike. If this goes to court, they'll dig into the mission. And even if the truth comes out, it'll put too many people in danger. Michael sighed, his frustration evident. So what's your plan? Just let this guy destroy your reputation. Jack's jaw tightened. The truth will come out another way. It always does. Late one night, as Jack was sitting on his porch, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. Hesitantly, he answered. Calloway. A voice on the other end said, low and menacing. You think you're untouchable? Keep your mouth shut, or your granddaughter pays the price. Jack's blood ran cold. Who is this? What do you want? The line went dead, leaving Jack gripping the phone in silence. Emma sat in the dimly lit cafe, her laptop open and papers strewn across the table. Across from her sat Megan Porter, an experienced investigative journalist with a reputation for exposing corruption. You're telling me Lucas Byrne has a pattern of fabricating stories? Emma asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and hope. Megan nodded, sliding over a folder filled with printouts. I've been tracking his work for years. He's smart, but his ambition blinds him. This isn't the first time he's stretched the truth or outright lied to build a narrative. If we can connect his past fabrications to what he's doing to Jack, we can take him down. The two women pored over article after article, highlighting inconsistencies, unverified sources, and retracted statements. Lucas had built a career on shaky foundations, and now it seemed those foundations were beginning to crack. Meanwhile, Lucas sat in his editor's office, facing Sylvia's stern expression. Lucas, she began, sliding a folder across the desk. We've received formal complaints about your reporting. The Calloway piece isn't airtight, and now your past articles are being scrutinized. Lucas stiffened. This is a smear campaign by Calloway supporters. They're trying to discredit me because they know I'm right. Sylvia sighed. I'm putting you on probation. No more articles on Calloway until we verify every claim. And I suggest you start questioning your sources. Lucas clenched his fists. You're making a mistake. Jack Calloway is hiding something, and I'm going to prove it. As he stormed out of the office, Lucas's resolve only hardened. Exposing Jack wasn't just about the story anymore. It was about vindicating his father's tarnished legacy. Jack sat on his porch, staring into the distance as the memories flooded back. The mission had been chaos from the start, but one moment stood out. Captain Byrne, injured and pinned down, crying out for help. Against his better judgment, Jack had rushed to Byrne's aid, dragging him to safety under a hail of bullets. But Byrne's gratitude had been short-lived. Weeks later, Jack had discovered that Byrne had leaked sensitive intel to the enemy, jeopardizing the entire platoon. Jack had reported Byrne, leading to the captain's court-martial. Yet the betrayal had left a scar on Jack's conscience, one that now felt freshly reopened. Emma and Megan's investigation uncovered a startling connection. Carl Mason, Lucas's key source, had been paid by an unknown entity to provide false testimony against Jack. Bank records showed substantial deposits into Carl's account, all originating from offshore accounts linked to a holding company with ties to retired General Harlow. This isn't just about Lucas, Megan said, tapping the screen. There's a whole network protecting Harlow and discrediting anyone who could expose him. Jack's just the latest target. Emma felt a surge of anger. Lucas doesn't even realize he's being used. He's so focused on his father's legacy that he's blind to the bigger picture. Lucas's doubts about Carl began to grow when he couldn't corroborate some of Carl's more damning claims. I need proof, Lucas demanded during their next meeting. Carl smirked. You want proof? I'll get you proof. But it'll cost you. The encounter left Lucas uneasy, but he pushed his concerns aside. He couldn't afford to question Carl now, not when his entire narrative depended on him. In Jack's hometown, tensions reached a boiling point. Supporters rallied outside Jack's house, holding signs demanding justice and proclaiming his innocence. But the crowd attracted counter-protesters, some of whom had been stirred up by Lucas's articles. The confrontation turned violent when a protester threw a rock, shattering Jack's living room window. Police arrived to disperse the crowd, but the damage had been done. Emma clutched Jack's arm as they watched the chaos unfold from behind closed curtains. "This is getting out of hand," she whispered. Jack's jaw tightened. "They're not just coming after me. They're coming after everything I stand for." Emma and Megan's digging uncovered a smoking gun, financial records linking Carl to General Harlow. The payments, disguised as consulting fees, coincided with Lucas's articles, suggesting Harlow was orchestrating a smear campaign against Jack to bury the truth about the mission. "Harlow's covering his tracks," Megan said, "and Lucas is his unwitting pawn." Emma felt a pang of sympathy for Lucas, but her focus remained on Jack. "We need more than this. Something definitive that clears Jack's name once and for all." One evening, Lucas returned home to find a package on his doorstep. Inside were old photographs of his father, Jack, and General Harlow, all taken during their time in the military. Attached was a note: "The truth is closer than you think." Lucas stared at the photos, his mind racing. Why was Jack in these photos with his father? And what did Harlow have to do with it? For the first time, Lucas felt the edges of his narrative begin to fray. The breakthrough came late one night when Emma, scanning declassified military files, found an unredacted document buried in an obscure database. It detailed the covert mission and the betrayal orchestrated by Harlow. The document proved Jack had acted heroically to save his platoon, while Harlow had manipulated events to cover up his own crimes. But the document came with a warning. Releasing it would expose Emma to legal and personal risks, as it implicated powerful figures still active in politics. She stared at the screen, torn between her desire to clear her grandfather's name and the dangers that lay ahead. Jack sat in the quiet confines of his study, the weight of Emma's plan pressing heavily on him. "An anonymous leak?" he asked, his voice tinged with both hope and hesitation. Emma nodded, determination etched on her face. "It's the only way, Grandpa. If we release what we've found without revealing your identity, we can expose Harlow and clear your name without you violating your oath." Jack leaned back in his chair, memories of the mission surfacing like ghosts. "Anonymous or not, this will open old wounds," he murmured. Years ago, in the heat of a war zone, Jack had faced the hardest decision of his life. His platoon had been tasked with securing vital intel on enemy operations, but their path was obstructed by a village teeming with innocent civilians. Jack had to choose: follow orders or protect lives. He'd chosen the civilians, sacrificing the mission's objective and trusting his superior, Captain Byrne, to explain his decision to the brass. But Byrne had betrayed him, painting Jack as insubordinate and framing the decision as negligence. The fallout had haunted Jack ever since, a shadow threatening to engulf him entirely. Lucas sat at his desk, rereading the files Carl had provided. Among them were documents accusing Jack of war crimes, evidence Lucas hadn't included in his previous articles. With his editor demanding hard proof and public interest dwindling, Lucas knew he had to escalate. "This will make them listen," he muttered, crafting a narrative that painted Jack as a man who had sacrificed civilians for his own gain. Carl's testimony bolstered the claims, and Lucas convinced himself that even if the records were tampered, the ends justified the means. The backlash was immediate. Jack's name trended across social media, accompanied by accusations of atrocities. Protesters gathered outside his home, some holding signs branding him a murderer. Emma's heart sank as she scrolled through the vitriol online. Megan called, her tone urgent. "Emma, we need to act now. The public's turning against Jack, and if we don't counter this narrative, it might be too late." Emma's jaw tightened. "Then let's disprove this. I don't care what it takes." Lucas's confidence began to waver as he started receiving anonymous threats. Late one night, he opened an email that read, "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Attached was a photo of his apartment building, The messages escalated, with cryptic warnings left in his mailbox and strange cars idling outside his home. Lucas, once fearless in his pursuit of a story, began to feel like a pawn in a game far larger than he'd anticipated. Fueled by desperation, Jack decided to confront Lucas. He found him outside the newsroom, pacing nervously. "Lucas," Jack called out, his voice firm but calm. Lucas turned, startled. "What do you want?" Jack stepped closer, his eyes steady. "To tell you the truth about your father, and the mission that started all of this." Lucas scoffed. "You think you can twist the narrative to save your own skin?" Jack didn't flinch. "Your father wasn't the hero you think he was. He betrayed our platoon, leaked intel to the enemy, and cost lives. I saved him when no one else would, but he repaid that by destroying my reputation." Lucas's face paled, but his defiance remained. "You're lying," Jack sighed, pulling out a photograph of the platoon, including Captain Byrne. "Ask yourself why my story has remained consistent while the people you trust keep changing theirs. Deep down, you know something doesn't add up." Meanwhile, Emma and Megan worked tirelessly, sifting through financial records and classified documents. Their persistence paid off when they discovered a series of emails connecting General Harlow to the smear campaign. "Harlow orchestrated everything," Megan said, astonished. "He funded Carl, provided Lucas with doctored records, and used his influence to keep the truth buried." Emma's eyes narrowed. "This is our proof. Now we just need to make the world see it." Lucas, still reeling from Jack's confrontation, returned to his apartment to find another package waiting. Inside was a file detailing his father's court-martial, along with a note. "You've been chasing the wrong enemy." The truth loomed over him like a storm cloud, but Lucas couldn't accept it. Not yet. He clung to the belief that Jack was hiding something, refusing to acknowledge that his crusade might be built on lies. Emma and Megan prepared to release their findings, aware of the risks involved. The evidence was damning, but Harlow's reach extended far. As they uploaded the files to a secure platform, Emma's hands trembled. "Once this goes live, there's no turning back," she said. Megan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then let's make it count." Emma and Megan marched into Lucas's office unannounced, their expressions steeled with purpose. Megan dropped a thick manila folder on his desk, the weight of its contents echoed by her words. "You've been played, Lucas, and it's time you face the truth." Lucas glanced at the folder, his skepticism wavering as Emma spoke. "You think you're exposing Jack, but the real puppet master is Harlow. Everything you've written, every piece of evidence you've published, it's all part of his plan to bury the truth about his war crimes." Lucas hesitated, his fingers brushing the folder's edge. "If you're wrong, this could ruin me." The documents told a damning story. Financial records linking Carl Mason to the general. Emails detailing fabricated accusations. And most devastating of all, court-martial records showing how Harlow had scapegoated Captain Byrne to save his own reputation. Lucas's throat tightened as he read through his father's disgrace, now reframed as a calculated betrayal by the general he'd once admired. Memories of his father's bitter rants resurfaced, tinged with a new, painful clarity. Why would Harlow go after Jack? Lucas asked, his voice strained. "Because Jack knows the truth," Emma replied. "And Harlow's been silencing anyone who threatens to expose him." As Lucas grappled with his guilt, Jack reflected on his own brush with Harlow's wrath. After the mission, Jack had confronted the general in a dimly lit office, demanding answers for the betrayal that had cost lives. "You're playing a dangerous game, soldier," Harlow had warned, his voice cold and calculated. "Walk away, or your family pays the price." Jack had walked away, swallowing his pride to protect his daughter and granddaughter. But now, the ghosts of that decision were back, and they wouldn't let him rest. Lucas knew what he had to do, but the cost was staggering. Exposing Harlow meant admitting his own complicity, risking his career and reputation. He sat alone in his apartment, staring at his laptop. "I've built my life on tearing others down," he whispered to himself. "Maybe it's time to build something that matters." The next morning, Lucas called Megan. "I'll help you, but we do this right. Every fact, every name, every piece of evidence. We take him down for good. Megan's relief was palpable. You won't regret this, Lucas. Together, we can finally bring the truth to light. The deeper they dug, the darker the conspiracy became. Harlow's network spanned decades, with ties to defense contractors, corrupt politicians, and even media outlets. Lucas uncovered emails revealing how Harlow had fed him false leads, exploiting his vendetta against Jack to divert attention from the general's crimes. Meanwhile, Jack faced a choice that tore at his soul. Breaking his oath and going public with the full truth could vindicate him, but it might also put Emma and her family in danger. Is my honor worth their safety? He asked himself, the question echoing in the silence of his home. As Emma began sharing pieces of the uncovered evidence online, the tide started to turn. Supporters rallied behind Jack, flooding social media with messages of solidarity. Small protests outside Jack's home transformed into gatherings of people demanding justice. He's not a fraud, one man declared to a local reporter. He's a hero, and it's time the world knows it. But the growing momentum didn't go unnoticed. Harlow's men began circling closer, their presence a reminder of the stakes Jack faced. Late one night, Jack's quiet resolve was shattered by the sound of breaking glass. He rushed to the living room, finding two masked men standing amid the wreckage of his window. "This ends tonight," one growled, advancing with a crowbar. Jack's military instincts kicked in. Grabbing a heavy lamp, he positioned himself between the intruders and the hallway leading to Emma's room. "You want me? Come and get me," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Jack's years of training took over as he fought off the attackers, his movements precise and unrelenting. By the time the police arrived, one man lay unconscious and the other had fled. As officers questioned him, Jack stood firm, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not running anymore," he declared. "It's time the truth comes out." In the aftermath, Emma clutched Jack's hand. "You're a fighter, Grandpa. Always have been, and now we're going to finish this." Jack nodded, a glimmer of hope breaking through the storm. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his past begin to lift. The sun rose over the quiet town as Lucas, Megan, and Emma convened in Megan's cramped office, the air thick with determination. They had compiled weeks of evidence, financial records, redacted documents, and testimonies linking the general to the conspiracy. Today, they will release the truth. "Are you ready for this?" Emma asked Lucas, watching as he drafted the final sentences of the exposé. Lucas nodded, his hands trembling. "For the first time in my career, I think I am. Let's give them the story they deserve." The article went live at noon, titled "Betrayed Honor: The Truth Behind the Smear Campaign Against a Veteran." It exposed not only the general's crimes, but also Lucas's own complicity in the defamation. "I was wrong," Lucas wrote. "Blinded by my own bias and manipulated by powerful forces, I became a pawn in a larger game of deception. Today, I choose to stand on the side of truth." The exposé ignited a firestorm. Media outlets picked up the story, and public opinion began to shift. Hashtags like #JusticeForJack trended nationwide, bringing a groundswell of support for the veteran who had been wronged. In a closed military hearing, Jack sat stoically before a panel of officials. For the first time, he revealed the details of the classified mission, recounting the betrayal and its devastating aftermath. "I made a promise to protect my platoon, my country, and the civilians caught in the crossfire," Jack said, his voice steady. "But I was betrayed by those who were supposed to lead us. I stayed silent to protect my family, but silence only let the lies grow louder." The room fell silent as Jack finished his testimony. Among those present was Lucas, who watched with a mixture of guilt and admiration as Jack stood tall, unflinching in the face of his own painful memories. Days later, the general was arrested in a dramatic public raid, his web of corruption exposed for the world to see. The news sent shockwaves through the nation, with pundits praising Jack's bravery and condemning those who had sought to destroy him. Despite the public outcry, Jack remained reserved. When Emma suggested celebrating, he shook his head. "Justice isn't about glory," he said. "It's about setting things right." Lucas faced the consequences of his actions. His employer terminated his contract, and his reputation in journalism was irreparably damaged. Yet, he found solace in a new path, working with veterans to document their untold stories. "These men and women deserve to be heard," Lucas said in an interview. "It's the least I can do to atone for my mistakes." Megan and Emma, meanwhile, were hailed as heroes. Emma's determination and Megan's expertise had uncovered a conspiracy that reached the highest levels, inspiring countless others to pursue justice. For Jack, life began to return to a semblance of normalcy. The community that had once turned on him now rallied around him, offering support and apologies. But Jack remained cautious, knowing the scars of betrayal would never fully heal. "People mean well," Jack told Emma one evening, "but trust isn't something you rebuild overnight. It takes time." Emma nodded, her respect for her grandfather deepened by the ordeal. "You've taught me more about strength and integrity than anyone ever could," she said. A month after the general's arrest, a public ceremony was held in Jack's honor. Hundreds gathered to celebrate his service and vindication, including many who had once doubted him. Jack reluctantly took the podium, his weathered face reflecting the gravity of the moment. "Integrity isn't about never falling," he began. "It's about standing back up, no matter how hard you're pushed down. My hope is that this chapter serves as a reminder. The truth will always find its way to the light." His words left the audience in tears, and a standing ovation followed. In the quiet of the evening, Lucas visited Jack at his home. He stood nervously at the doorstep, clutching a handwritten note. When Jack opened the door, Lucas looked him in the eye. "I came to say I'm sorry," Lucas said. "Not just for what I wrote, but for the pain I caused you and your family. I was wrong, and I'll carry that guilt forever." Jack studied him for a moment before stepping aside. "Come in," he said. The two men sat together, sharing stories of the past. Forgiveness wasn't immediate, but it was a start, a tentative bridge between the wounds of betrayal and the possibility of redemption. Jack sat on the porch of his modest home, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, gazing out at the sprawling countryside. The morning sun cast a golden hue over the fields, and for the first time in years, he felt a profound sense of relief. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered in his heart. The events of the past months had taken their toll, both emotionally and physically. Jack's thoughts often returned to the mission, to the faces of the men and women he had fought alongside. Some memories brought pride, others an ache so deep it threatened to unravel him. Was it worth it? He wondered aloud, the question hanging in the air. The truth was bittersweet. Justice had been served, but the lives lost, the betrayals endured, were wounds time could never fully heal. Emma's voice drifted through the open window, pulling Jack from his thoughts. She was seated at the kitchen table, poring over her laptop. Since the investigation's conclusion, Emma had dedicated herself to sharing Jack's story, writing articles and speaking at events to inspire others with his tale of resilience and integrity. "Grandpa, listen to this," she called out, her voice tinged with excitement. She began reading aloud from a heartfelt email she'd received from a young veteran. "Your story gave me hope when I felt like giving up. It reminded me that integrity matters, even when the world seems against you. Thank you for being a beacon of strength." Jack smiled, a quiet pride warming his chest. "You're doing good work, kid," he said. "Keep telling the truth. It matters more than anything." In a bustling city hundreds of miles away, Lucas Burns stood in front of a small audience of veterans and their families. Behind him, a banner read, "Second Chance," advocating for those who serve. Lucas had poured his heart into the nonprofit, dedicating it to providing resources, legal aid, and media platforms for veterans to share their stories. His reputation in journalism might have been tarnished, but he had found a deeper purpose in redemption. "As someone who got it wrong, I owe it to all of you to get it right," Lucas said, his voice steady. The crowd applauded, and for the first time, Lucas felt something he hadn't in years: peace. Megan's book, Shattered Honor, The Battle for Truth, had become an instant bestseller. Critics hailed it as a masterpiece of investigative journalism, a fearless expose that shed light on corruption and celebrated the resilience of those who stood against it. During a televised interview, Megan was asked about the moment she realized the investigation was more than just a story. "When Emma showed me who Jack really was," Megan replied, "I understood this was about more than clearing his name. It was about reclaiming integrity in a world that had lost its way." One evening, as Jack was sorting through a stack of mail, he paused at an envelope with no return address. Opening it, he found a handwritten letter on weathered paper. "Jack," it began, "I've kept my distance all these years, but I've been watching. What you've done, standing up to the lies, protecting our honor, gave me the courage to reach out. I thought I'd lost everything, but maybe there's still a chance to set things right. Let's talk. Jay." Jack's breath caught in his throat. The signature matched that of a comrade he had presumed killed during the mission. The letter was both a mystery and a gift, a thread connecting him to the past and hinting at stories yet untold. A month later, the small-town community gathered at Jack's home for a barbecue. The scent of grilled food filled the air, and laughter rang out as children chased each other across the lawn. Emma stood by the grill, teasing Jack about his perfectly charred burgers. Megan chatted with neighbors, her camera slung over one shoulder, capturing candid moments for her next project. As Jack looked around, his heart swelled. The journey had been painful, but it had brought him here, surrounded by love, respect, and the knowledge that he had done what was right. The weight of the past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer defined him. He had reclaimed his honor, not just for himself, but for those who could no longer fight for theirs. As the sun set and the sky turned a soft pink, Jack leaned back in his chair, a rare smile gracing his face. The fight for justice had been worth it, and for the first time in years, he felt truly at peace.